I remember booting up Tomb Raider 2 on my dad's old iMac G5. I didn't understand the story back then, but the shooting and parkour movements were amazing. When I got older, the games also matured, and I had a blast playing Tomb Raider Anniversary on the PlayStation 3. Then this shit released. No. In this video we will be taking a journey back in time to the golden age of Tomb Raider games, and what the upcoming Remastered collection will mean for the franchise. Tomb Raider was released first in Europe for the Sega Saturn on October 25, 1996. It was later released in other parts of the world on PC, PlayStation 1, macOS, iOS and Android, as well as the Engage. The cultural impact of Tomb Raider cannot be overlooked. It may not seem like it to the younger of you, who are only familiar with poorly received sequels or more greedy reboots, but in 96-97, Lara Croft was immensely popular. It had sponsorships with car brands to sports drinks and became one of the best-selling video games for the PlayStation 1, with 7 million units sold worldwide. The title was crafted by Core Design, a 6-man team at the time, which took 18 months to develop it. Interestingly though, its publishing company Eidos was rumored to be near bankruptcy when Tomb Raider was created. The game starred a British archaeologist named Lara Croft, who is hired by businesswoman Jacqueline Netla to recover pieces of an artifact called the Scion. Lara navigates treacherous tombs and solves ancient puzzles to uncover the fragment. The gameplay made her rough to look back on, but it inspired many action-adventure games going forward. Tomb Raider is one of, if not the first game with the modern era of game loop design. Rather than just getting to the end, reaching the exit in Tomb Raider is more objective based. Find this key to open this door, solve this puzzle to advance, so on and so forth. Tomb Raider's structure essentially wrote the blueprint for games like Assassin's Creed, Grand Theft Auto, Far Cry, Devil May Cry, and many other games that blur genre lines today. The gameplay in Tomb Raider is like 85% platforming, exploring and puzzle solving, and 15% action and shooting things. That's not necessarily a complaint, or at least wasn't in 1996, but I'll get to that in a bit. Unlike Resident Evil, released a few months before this, Tomb Raider is fully 3D, with no fixed camera and no pre-rendered backgrounds. You can walk, run, jump, roll, climb on or across ledges, dive and swim in water, push and pull blocks and levers, pick up objects and fire not just one gun, but two at the same time. A lot of this was unheard of in a fully 3D environment, especially one with such a realistic setting and character modes. Thankfully, once you switch to weapon holding mode, you automatically aim on the nearest enemy, and if there are two enemies and you have two guns, you aim at two separately. Overall, it was a really impressive setup at the time. The controls made for deft movements and tight jumps. Be sure to bring along a strategy guide for the hidden ones. The enemy variety is good too. There are a lot of dangerous wildlife, but you also get an odd human to shoot at or T-Rex to battle. And some of the puzzles were quite clever, some of them going on to be used by hundreds other similar games going forward. There are fully voiced cutscenes, which given, once again, that it was released in the same year as the original Resident Evil, are not too bad. Not good, but not original Resi bad. One small negative point though, some of the problematic camera angles, familiar to players of Super Mario 64, occur here as well. They have a smaller impact on gameplay here however, because of the game's emphasis on puzzles over action. A fun fact to break up the video. Lara's famous breast size was created by accident. Toby Gard, the inventor of Lara Croft, was messing around with the model when he accidentally blew up Lara's bosom to 150% of what he intended it to be. The team loved it and kept the increased size. Not long after the release of Tomb Raider 1, Eidos approved of a sequel, and Tomb Raider 2 was released for Windows and PlayStation on the 24th of November 1997. Following on from a previous adventure, Lara Croft is once again on the hunt for ancient artifacts. This time is the Dagger of Xian, a mythical Japanese weapon that allegedly turns its wielder into a deadly gigantic dragon. Lara once again has to travel to a number of exotic locations, and this time around she sets odds with Marco Bartoli, an Italian mob boss. Many of the features of the first game made a return, but the team at Core Design also brought a lot of unused ideas to the table. The game is willfully different. It knows it has to give players what they want. More platforming, more craft, but is determined not to give in and give players what they want in the way they expect it. The learning curve is steeper and the combat is harder. There are more gun options and vehicles were added to the game. For example, there's a speedboat early on which requires you to navigate the narrow canals of Venice, while you get a submersible craft to explore some deep sea wreckage later on. And while mentioning Venice, let's talk about the environments. The story circles around ancient China, kicking off at the Great Wall and headed eventually to Tibet and back to China again. But along the way, Venice, largely in the form of a massive abandoned opera house, and that oil rig, and that shipwreck, all of these places are non-ancient, but they earn their inclusion by being abandoned. This gives Tomb Raider 2 a very distinctive feel. The thing about all these places, one of the most important reasons they stick in the mind, is that you're there in each of them for a very long time. Tomb Raider 2 is absolutely massive for one thing, but the game could also be fiddly and abstruse. The solution to a puzzle might be extremely counterintuitive, or it might be a tiny puzzle piece hidden on the floor and blending with the carpet, or it might be a move that you learned early on in the game and then spend the last 10 hours not using and forgetting about. This means that Tomb Raider 2 is a game where you can really get stuck, so you settle in. Croft ends up living in these worlds, and so does the player. Another part that plays a role in this is the fantastic soundtrack. Unlike with the first game, where the music only played during cutscenes, the music of Tomb Raider 2 is constantly going. This adds tension in hectic moments and atmosphere to the general feeling of the game. Overall, Tomb Raider 2 is a solid sequel, which doesn't break any of the components of the brilliant original, but layers on top of them to make a worthy successor. The Suicide Idols realized that they were onto a winner with the Tomb Raider games, and so swiftly announced another entry into the series. But in winter 1998, when Tomb Raider 3 arrived, there was a mixed reaction. This is the game that saw the start of the hostility, which is a bit of a pity really, as it's a very good game on its own. It's only when compared to the other games in the series that it suffers. The game's visuals are where the main enhancements lie. While it may not look that different at first, comparing it side by side with the earlier titles shows that its facelift is fairly major. The lighting and water effects are very impressive, and the textures are much better looking and more widely varied. This translates into a better gameplay experience, as it's now much easier to identify ledges and jump off points. Make no mistake though, it's still an heavily difficult game in which a strategy guide is almost a prerequisite and save points are like candy, because of the unlimited saves of Tomb Raider 2 are gone. This is ultimately the best thing that Tomb Raider 3 has got going for it. Although it means that more casual gamers are unlikely to see the end sequence, it also makes every single completed jump, every defeated foe and every secret discovered seem like a tremendous achievement. There is such a sense of accomplishment in this game that you genuinely become determined that you will keep going until you finish the level. Also to that same end, the camera perspectives, though not quite ideal yet, are more refined so that lining up jumps isn't as hard. New elements such as the character's ability to sprint, crawl, monkey swing and use new vehicles add some variety to the game. And the emphasis on stealth in some of the levels and improved AI of the enemies helps as well. The lack of linearity in being able to use different routes within many of the levels, as well as being able to choose one of 3 paths after wrapping up the India stage is nice too. And it must be said that the game is absolutely huge, with over 15 levels that can each take up to a few hours to complete. One complaint often made against the series is that there aren't enough enemies to fight. Though there are more foes in Tomb Raider 3 than in the previous game, there aren't many, but that's not really a bad thing. It doesn't seem to be a particularly valid criticism to lodge against the title, since it simply isn't that type of game. For those who are looking to shoot or carve through tons of foes in a 3D environment, there are games like Duke Nukem Time to Kill and Tenchu. The Tomb Raider line remains more about puzzles and exploration than combat. For now we only discussed the good games, but in between 1999 and 2003 the games weren't that good. Let's start with Tomb Raider The Lost Revelation. This is the first game where franchise fatigue started setting in. Core Design was tired of making Tomb Raider games, and it showed. There were a ton of new ideas in this game, however, most of them aren't greatly executed. I think the new, what should we call it, backtracking non-linear hub-like level system of this game is either something you love or you don't. I'd wish they would have kept it like in the original trilogy, because it feels somewhat underdeveloped in this game. While the game felt fresh in certain aspects, it felt fatigued in others. Most of the time, you don't do that much. In between the basic actions, there isn't much platforming and puzzle solving anymore. Also, the music, compared to the previous 3 games, is rather mediocre. And then there are the ropes. May they burn in hell. The Lost Revelation, as you can guess from the title, was supposed to be the final Tomb Raider game. However, there was still a high demand for Tomb Raider games, which meant there had to be more sequels. This led to the development of what is possibly the weakest link in the franchise, Tomb Raider Chronicles. Story and graphics are good. That's it. Literally. The whole game borrowed a lot from franchises like Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, Siphon Filter, etc. and could just as well have had a different character than Lara. It still feels like Tomb Raider, but in tone they have gone far away from what made Tomb Raider the thing it was. It makes sense though, because the previous couple of games, despite being very good, were being criticized for being more of the same. This game also had too many cutscenes, in such a way that they break up the enjoyment of the levels. There too were many bugs, like Lara being suddenly invisible, a room being flooded when it shouldn't be, and a level not ending when it should. Lara Croft's first game on PlayStation 2, Tomb Raider: The Angel of Darkness, wasn't well received as well. First of all, this game had many bugs, from health items not working to enemies that don't register any damage. Besides, there were some serious optimization issues that could cause a button press to register 3 seconds later at times. The enemy AI is, well, lacking. Most of the enemies just stand there like mannequins. Despite it being a PlayStation 2 title, the gameplay mechanics were considered a step down according to many. The controls felt clunky and unbecoming of a 2003 PlayStation 2 title, and the new stealth mechanics felt poorly implemented and superficial. One major selling point of this game was that you get to play as a second character, Curtis Trent. Allow me to clarify this, you get to play as Curtis for 2 levels plus a boss fight. That's it. That's 2 levels out of the near 24 in the game. Also kind of irritating is that the gameplay mechanics don't change at all for Curtis. He's got his badass throwing blade weapon straight out of Predator, but he only uses this in the cutscenes. With all the mixed and negative reviews that the Angel of Darkness and Chronicles were receiving, it was high time for Tomb Raider to get a makeover. And sure enough, it did. The Tomb Raider IP was handed over to a new developer, Crystal Dynamics, and they delivered Tomb Raider Legend. They had gone back to their series' roots to find out what made the original games the masterpieces they were. Their influence shows through tremendously, taking us back to what Lara does best, raiding tombs. The levels are fairly varied and creepy, while also having a feeling of awe and mystery about them. From ancient stone temples in Peru to an underground tomb in England, the locations are classic Tomb Raider fare. Taking their cue from other platformers, Prince of Persia for example, Lara now has a range of moves at her disposal, and the animation and feeling is a lot smoother now. The levels really do take this into account, making the gameplay experience feel very fluid and polished. Combat was once a thorn in Tomb Raider's side, but not anymore. Lara's been given more moves, including the ability to aim the gun at anything anytime, a multi-purpose grappling hook, a slide attack, and the ability to enter focus mode. Besides, all of her weapons and tools are a single button press away. The D-pad switches weapons, activates her personal light source, refills the health meter, and pulls up a slick little set of binoculars, which come in handy when confronted by a tough puzzle. The most obvious change to previous games though, is that the old grid system is abandoned, which makes the levels and the gameplay feel a lot more realistic. Graphics also got a huge update. Far from the blocky textures of old, the levels are given a nice atmosphere, with the dim lighting showing up some of the more creepy artifacts. And Lara herself is looking better than ever, with a range of costume changes throughout the game. To hop on the bandwagon of recent games, such as Resident Evil 4, interactive cutscenes were added, whereas you must press a button displayed on the screen, to save Lara for example. And then there are the motorbike sections, that feel like a fun minigame and add variety to the overall gameplay. The game was released on old gen and next gen consoles, with the last featuring a next generation content mode. This turns the already fantastic looking graphics into even more detailed textures and lighting effects that make the game look stunning, even when comparing it to games today. Crystal Dynamics also thought about replay value and added hidden treasures and time trials, which unlock rewards like concept art and extra outfits. While the original Tomb Raider game hasn't aged particularly well, it is one of the most influential games to date. Crystal Dynamics saw the potential and completely reimagined the original Tomb Raider in Tomb Raider Anniversary. It combines the few gameplay elements that did remain strong, mainly the level design, and combines them with modern gameplay to create a game that feels fresh and is just simply fun to play. The original had quite strict character movement, but luckily the grid system has been removed entirely in this game. This remake has very responsive controls, which makes the more demanding platforming in the game significantly more reasonable. The added precision in controlling the game is incredibly important, because this game requires you to do a lot of very exact navigation. The bulk of the game revolves around leaping from platform to platform, climbing walls and swimming from poles. The brilliant level design requires some strategy in determining what's the best way to navigate an area, because one poor jump will almost invariably result in death. The game is pretty unforgiving as far as the platforming goes, but it doesn't feel unfair or impossible to advance through the game. In contrast to Tomb Raider Legends, the previous game, platforming and puzzle solving make up a much bigger portion of the game, while combat takes more of a backseat. Puzzles are enjoyable to work through and satisfying to complete, which is a surprisingly rare occurrence in games that stress puzzles as much as this one. Combat is very similar to that in Tomb Raider Legends. Lara has the standard acrobatics that allow her to dodge enemies while firing her guns. What is new to this iteration is the inclusion of an adrenaline dodge. This technique works well and adds some needed depth to the combat. The interactive cutscenes also make a return here, though they are used less frequently than in Tomb Raider Legends. The level design is left intact for the most part, but every level is reworked in some way to incorporate the new platforming elements. The graphics too got updated. There's a number of subtle effects on Lara's character model that look really good. The lighting effects are utilized very effectively here and add a lot to make the environments look believable. The game utilizes depth of field and some stylized motion blur effects, which look great and thankfully aren't overused. Not since Resident Evil Remake has there been such a significant reimagining of a classic. Tomb Raider Anniversary successfully stays true to the source material, yet offers a significant amount of reworked content that's actually fun to play through today. As a result, it is completely successful as a remake, and it breathed new life into a game that would otherwise remain a fossil. In 2008, Tomb Raider Underworld was released, the sequel that completed Lara Croft's origin story. It wraps up plot points left hanging in the previous games, while also introducing the new Norse mythology. Lara's quest centers around Thor's hammer, traveling from the ancient ruins of Iceland to the depths of the sunken city of Helheim. Lara is as nimble as ever, with roughly the same movement mechanics as either Legend or Anniversary. The bike from Tomb Raider Legend makes a return and handles even better than before. What is new is that you can jump between two vertical surfaces. This adds a new handy element to the platforming. Another new ability is free climb. Certain walls have a series of handles on them, allowing you to climb without leaping from one ledge to another. One more significant change is that the levels are huge in this game. In the beginning of a level you don't even know where to start, but the fun lies in exploring and puzzle solving until you reach the solution. And if you feel totally stuck, you can use the tip system, which dishes out a clue or piece of advice. Later levels have an almost free roaming feel to them, with Lara able to bike around the environment and leaving it behind when entering buildings. These are some of the most well designed levels in the whole Tomb Raider series. Much of the wow factor comes from the colossal structures, massive statues and epic monsters. Another related gimmick in Underworld is swimming. The controls are easy to master and the underwater environments look phenomenal. To help you navigate them, you can access the sonar map, which gives you a 3D map of the surrounding area. Tomb Raider Underworld might remind you of another pretty game on the PlayStation 3, Uncharted. While it does have similar looking locations, lighting and water effects, Tomb Raider established itself way before Nathan Drake was even a glimmer in Naughty Dog's eye. Tomb Raider Underworld is a gorgeous game that doesn't deviate from what we've come to expect from Lara Croft over the years. The additions of swimming, motorcycle driving and melee combat managed to add something to Underworld without reinventing the wheel. Fast forward to 2024 and the Tomb Raider franchise is finally getting some attention again. First announced back in September during a Nintendo Direct, the original trilogy is getting a remaster. It buffs out all the polygons for fresh new graphics. Lara's appearance will be a lot more in line with the modern mobile and spin-off games that still work off of her original character design while looking a bit less alarming. While you can still play the 90s originals quite easily on PC via Steam or GOG, there are a number of good reasons why this remaster appeals. Aspyr, the studio behind it, tries to strike the perfect balance between preservation and modernization. The most notable difference is that the graphics got a massive update. From enhanced lighting and shading, higher resolution character models to new 3D models, it got it all. And to preserve the nostalgic charm of the classic games, you have the option to switch between the updated graphics and original pixel art visuals at any time. And to admire all this beauty, a fully fledged photo mode is added. It's not just visual changes that have been made though. In an effort to make these older entries more approachable to new players, there is now a control option that uses the right stick to move the camera and feels more like how most third-person action games feel nowadays. The game will too feature a camera lock-on system. But again, you can go into the settings and turn the old tank controls on if you prefer that. Additional improvements include a health bar for bosses. This is useful as many of the bigger enemies in the first 3 games could feel like they could take unlimited damage, and it was hard to know how much progress you were making during the fight. Furthermore, the game now includes more than 200 trophies spread across the 3 games. An example already teased, you get a trophy for locking the creepy butler in the mansion's freezer, a famous tradition among Tomb Raider fans. And the release date, may it be a coincidence or not, actually has a lore significance, because, as the OGs know, that's Lara Croft's birthday. According to the original timeline, she'd be turning 55 already. So, what does this remaster actually mean for the franchise? To begin with, the success of this trilogy is very important for the Tomb Raider franchise as a whole. Not only to get future remakes and new entries into the series, but also to keep Tomb Raider in Aspire's hands. At the moment of making this video, the game isn't out yet, but I do have high hopes for it. It looks like a promising and passionate project, made with care and attention to details, instead of being a mediocre money grabber. No one can say for certain what the future for the franchise holds, but that this remaster is happening looks like a good sign to me.